Now, if you have your Bibles, open it to chapter 37 of Genesis. And I'm going to do something today that you're going to find difficult, and I find difficult too. I'm not going to follow the narrative line. I'm going to work a bit more abstractly, all right? Now, next week, I hope that I'm a bit more narrative. And so this week, the Joseph story is too big to do as one narrative line, although I will tell you in a few sentences how the narrative goes. But let me back up and rehearse where we've come so we place the Joseph story in context. So I want to go back to the beginning, Act 1, that God created a creative, blessed, and just society. So central to what we're doing is that this world that God created in 6 days rehearses the 6th day at large with Adam being created, and then finally you reach the good when Eve was created, and they are naked, and they are a naked or open, just society. And this is what God wants. He wants society in His image, and He's created this. The goal of God on earth is to establish on earth human beings who are rightly related to each other. Act 2, and I'm not writing this up here since we've already done, and I'll draw this fairly small, is we have the disobedience of Adam and Eve plus Cain, we have the flood, and then we have the Tower of Babel. These are all connected by little genealogical links. And in this one, God judges humans for sin. And I've drawn the circles getting bigger because sin is spreading out, getting worse. The predicate, the understanding of the Bible is that there's something really badly wrong with you, right? And me too. There's something really badly wrong with us. And I don't like to think about that, and you don't like to think about that, and sometimes, come on, I don't really believe that, right? If I'm out mowing my grass and bagging the things and killing the dandelions and trimming the edges and making my yard look nice, I'm a good person, right? And I just wish my neighbors would kill their dandelions. I mean, that's got to be one of the most important things in life, isn't it? Killing dandelions, especially this time of year. And I mean, I don't really identify with these bad people. After all, I don't have any weeds in my garden. Well, I got other things growing in my garden, and we won't raise our hands about that, don't even need to raise an eyebrow. But God says very clearly up front, you know, I created them good, but they went bad. And then God's going to put things right. Act 3, God constructed, now I'm putting this in the past tense, but if I was doing this with my children, I'd certainly work in the present tense. God constructed a great, and we'll come to that today, holy, we'll come to that next year, and just, that's what we're working on, nation / society. That what He started out to do by creating a society, and it broke, now God is doing that again. Now there's a couple texts that I've labeled programmatic texts, Genesis 1:28, and we're going to look at this yet again today. It's the text that says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase and subdue the world and rule over it. You know that text, don't you? We're going to find the Joseph story really plays on that theme. The other text that the Joseph story picks up is the other great programmatic text. And here we are, scene 1. And this is the pioneers. And they come in pairs, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Jacob, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, and well, this gets a little tricky, doesn't it? It's Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, Zilpah. Don't ask me any questions about that, please. And they have among them 12 sons, which then become the 12 tribes of Israel. This one's name is Joseph. He's the firstborn of Rachel, and then Benjamin comes along. She had 2 children. Leah had 6, and Bilhah and Zilpah filled in the quota. And so here, God is beginning to build a nation, and the other great programmatic text to date is Genesis 12:2 and 3, where God says, Abraham, I'm going to bless you and make out of you a great nation / society. And through this, I am going to bring blessing to all of the families of the earth. So God's building a just nation, and it's going to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. Now, what have we had besides this? Abraham in Genesis 15:6 believed God, and God said, that's the right thing to do. You're behaving righteously. In 17:1, he said to him, walk before me and be blameless, which is clearly justice talk. And then he said, now about your children, I want you to teach them to do righteousness and justice. This is the way of the Lord. So that promise says, teach them to walk in the way of the Lord. What does that mean? To do righteousness and justice so that the promise may be fulfilled. End of quotation. And I take that as a pivotal text. And I'm going to try to unpack that text today in the life of Joseph. Did you follow what I said? I take that as a pivotal text. Going to try to unpack that text today in the life of Joseph. So the story is opening up and building on itself. And this scene knows about this scene. And we need to pay attention to it. So scene 2 is Joseph. And you know the story. Joseph wins an all-expense-paid trip for one to Egypt. Well, something like that, right? and he goes down to Egypt. Now, let's just think in terms of scenes. If you're an actor and if you're making a movie of this thing, your set here is the Garden of Eden, which I presume is not Indianapolis, but someplace else, right? Somewhere over there near Iraq or Iran. If you move here, then you're in the land of Canaan. But now, you and eventually the 70 move to Egypt, right? These are very distinct geographical regions with very distinct cultural backgrounds and what have you. And so if you're staging this, you got to put the curtain down, take all the scenery off, put in Egypt, you're with me, aren't you? So I'm marking these as scenes because primarily the geography is changing. Also, we have major actors changing. Now Joseph comes onto the scene. The family is still there, but Joseph is clearly the main player. Now, the other thing I did last week was I took the elements that we had picked up about justice and constructed a star of justice. And the star of justice with its 5 points has justice up here in terms of judging, although that word can also be ruling, the word shapat. It's the judicial or the forensic. And then in pairs, standard and conduct go together. Right conduct conforms to standard. And then retributive justice and distributive justice are obviously a pair, the pair of each other. And then in the middle, modifying all these, for they all must be done with fairness. Now, I'm going to take the concept of justice and use it as a fishing net. Now, I'm not a fisher person, so forgive me, all right? But, you know, if you get a great big net and you drag it through the water, you're going to pick up all kinds of things, aren't you? So I'm going to lower this over the edge into Genesis 37 and see what we pick up. And on the first time through, I got nothing. Because I was looking for justice words. There's Tamar, who's righteous. And at the very end of Genesis, you get that cryptic, and Dan, whose name means justice, will bring justice. But you don't know anything about that beyond that. So if you drag your net through looking for vocabulary, you're not going to live on that. So I broadened the net a little bit, and I said, let's add metaphors. And I took it through the water again. I still didn't get very much. So I said, how about antonyms? Remember we talked about antonyms? So I drug wickedness. I hit wickedness. Joseph says to Potiphar's wife, I won't do this wicked thing. Remember that? So what's he saying? He's saying, I'm going to behave righteously, isn't he? So using a little bigger, a little bit more sophisticated net pays off. But that's still not enough to go for 30 minutes, is it? So you got to broaden the net out a little bit bigger. And here's where I may get myself in trouble, and you too, is that I've added actions. That I assume that justice can be expressed in actions. So I've put my net back down through and tried to see what actions I can pick up. And I'm going to label the feeding of the Egyptians as a distributive justice act. Now, I'm not absolutely sure about that, all right? If you don't like it, put an X through it. Later we will come to distributive justice in actions that's very clearly labeled. We'll see that in the Exodus. I think that that's a fair read of it here, but at least I want you to understand how I'm fishing and what I'm doing and how I'm doing this, and to understand that the justice concept is building. Now, if you have your notes, you can pick up here Genesis 12 and the justice story. I want to ask about the Genesis 12 and how the doing of justice and righteousness, 18 and 19, in fulfillment of God's promise to build a nation and especially to bring blessing to all the families of the earth, how it works. How is it that Joseph is a blessing to all the families of the earth? I'm going to suggest it's by bringing justice, that he's doing justice and righteousness. Now, let me just pause and repeat myself from time ago. Joseph is not in the line of the Messiah, is he? It's who? Judah. Judah gets a story all right, and it's awful nasty, and we'll pick it up. But this story is not about Judah, it's about Joseph. And the reason it's about Joseph is because it is through Joseph that the story is really moving forward, and that is blessing the nations by the righteousness and the justice doing of Joseph. And I want to argue that he behaves, or he does, righteousness and justice in three ways. First of all, in his conduct. Secondly, in the mighty act of distributive justice and the feeding of the whole world. We'll come to that. And then thirdly, by his proclamation in words, his verbal proclamation about the Lord who does justice. All right? And I'm going to pick these up and use them later, but I just want to introduce them today. So first of all, chapter 39, we have Joseph, and I won't take more than a second to read a little bit of each of these, seeing as how this is a huge section. Chapter 39, verse 10, you know the story. Potiphar's wife has seen that Joseph is a handsome, good-looking man. She's been trying to seduce him. He's not seducible. Finally, she grabs him, and she tries to force him. Chapter 39, verse 9 says, Joseph says, "No one is greater in this house than I am." He had already been blessed by God, we'll see that later, and had moved up. The key word about Joseph is put in charge. That's repeated a number of times in the text. Put in charge. Joseph is an administrator par excellence. MBA, Harvard Business School, right? Or one of those schools, whatever you like. But he knows how to make things work. You've met people like that, haven't you? No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a, and look at, here's justice vocabulary, such a wicked thing? Do you see that? That's the antonym of righteous. And you can, if you run your concordance with wicked and righteous, you'll see that you get all kinds of pairs popping up in the text. And she spoke to Joseph day after day and refused to go to bed with her or even to be seen with her. Well, finally she entraps him, gets his cloak, yells rape. Potiphar comes home and says, "Oh dear," and he gets angry. The text is very subtle at this point. Doesn't say who he gets angry at. I think he's angry at his wife, quite frankly. I think he knows her. And instead of chopping Joseph's head off, he simply puts him in prison. I think the guy was shrewd enough to actually know what was going on in his house. But at any rate, however you read that story, that's what happens there. Chapter 38, just before this, is the Tamar story. The story starts in 37. I didn't read it. That's where he's sold into slavery. And by then, he's down into Egypt. And then all of a sudden, you get the Tamar story. And you're back in Canaan. And it's Judah. No. It's Joseph in Egypt. And the author has gotten all mixed up and made a terrible mistake here. There are actually commentaries that say that, and they're awful smart people, of course. I think there's a very straightforward way for understanding this. The Tamar story is a story about sex gone wrong, isn't it? So it parallels the possibility of sex going wrong with Potiphar. Tamar is actually said to be righteous in this story. So we get Tamar, who behaves righteously, contrary to what we think about her, but she's actually a righteous person because she's forcing her father-in-law, Judah, to give her the promised third son so that she can have a child to raise up to preserve the seed. That was well understood by them, maybe not by us. So she was righteous sexually. And that parallels Joseph behaving righteous sexually. And then you have the wicked people. It's Potiphar's wife and it's Judah, who are wicked sexually. So there's a lot of links, and apparently it stands here as a contrast story. At least that's one way of thinking about it. You might also think of the fact that both Tamar and Joseph are victims of injustice. Can I say that again? Both Tamar and Joseph are victims of injustice, and both are, and I use the word carefully, justified in the end. Both are justified in the end. So I think that story fits. Now, so the first thing I want to talk about is that the promise to make a nation which is fulfilled through doing justice and righteousness, it is fulfilled first of all through the conduct of Joseph. Secondly, I suggest for your thinking that it is fulfilled through his feeding of Israel, of Egypt, and then if you look with me, and I'm sorry just to sort of break into the story and read verses, but I don't know how else to do it and cover the whole set, but look at chapter 41 and verse 56. 41:56, when the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold the grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the world. And so Joseph, through what I would call this feeding as a mighty act of distributive justice. Here, conduct is righteous. And through this, he brings blessing to the whole world. Now, I really think that's why the Joseph story is here, and you'll begin to see it as we go on. That the Joseph story, a huge section, 37 through 50, the Joseph story is told to show that even within the time of the early pioneers, that the blessing of Genesis 12 is already being fulfilled. You could see it being fulfilled in Abraham rescuing Lot, but here it's even in capital letters, and you can see it more clearly. So although the justice vocabulary is not here, I think it's fair enough to label that. If we don't, I'm not going to worry about it. We can leave that for a later time. Now, there are other things to say about this. How is it that Joseph achieved this mighty act? How was he able to feed all these people? And here I want you to look with me at chapter 41. And God had exalted him. He had been able to interpret dreams. He had been exalted to a high position. He interprets the dream about the 7 years of famine and the 7 years of plenty, or the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And because he's able to do this, chapter 41:33 says, "And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man," says Joseph to Pharaoh about what's coming based on the dream, "and put him in charge." There's that favorite phrase. "Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance, and they should collect the food." It's administrative here. 37, the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. 38, so Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, Joseph, one in whom is the Spirit of God. Isn't that interesting? Now, exactly what Pharaoh understood by this, we don't know. What the narrator understood by it, we can make a pretty shrewd guess. But there it is. The Spirit of God is in him. And then verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so, and this is the second time we have this phrase, discerning and wise. This is the first time in Genesis we have this phrase. It's really the first time we have this vocabulary. The wise men a little earlier have the same vocabulary associated with them. So the concept of wisdom, this is wisdom language. This is the first time we have wisdom language here. Now, I must confess, I'm cheating a little bit. But sometimes if you don't cheat, you don't get very far, do you? So I'm cheating a little bit. And I know the end of the story, and so do you. But I know that later on, that wisdom becomes exceedingly problematic for those who try to understand the Bible, and particularly the scriptures of Israel, what we now call the Old Testament. How you put it all together. The wisdom literature, Proverbs, Job, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, all right? They do not refer to the covenant, and when we get the law, they don't refer to the law. Are they Jewish? I mean, how can you be Jewish? How can you be part of what God's doing and not quote the covenant and not quote the law? I mean, can you be American without putting out your flag? Well, there's probably more than one answer to that, but you understand where I'm going, don't you? I mean, and part of the problem is this huge chunk of wisdom literature doesn't fit nicely into the storyline, which is all about covenant and law, as we will see. It's about wisdom. But now there's an insight here that's really helpful, okay? And that is that it is wisdom that enables Joseph to do the mighty act of administering all this. It is wisdom that enables justice doing. Now that will be said right in capital letters in Proverbs and elsewhere. You know that, you've read that. So I'm looking a little bit ahead. But to work within the story, I want to pick this element up. Now, let me tell you what I'm doing. I'm focusing on the concept of justice, the star of justice, right? But we said last week, and you remember everything I said last week, of course. You're supposed to laugh now. You remember the concept of justice last week, the star. That's why every good teacher repeats themselves ad nauseum, right? You remember that star of justice, and I said to you, if you take the star of justice and lift it out of the storyline, it doesn't make much sense. And you've got to place it in the storyline, and that concept you need to relate to wider concepts, such as God. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. One of the concepts that will be very important for us to relate justice to is wisdom. One of the concepts that will be very important for us to relate justice to is wisdom. We've looked at a couple other questions, and that is, how does mercy relate to justice, right? Now, mercy and holiness and wisdom are not justice vocabulary, but they are other concepts that form the larger picture in which justice is embedded. So you can't disembed the concept of justice from this larger network and really make sense of it. Now I realize it's Sunday at 11:30 and you need your lunch, but if you've still got a little bit of energy left intellectually, if you're thinking about what I'm saying, you realize that the task then of understanding justice is really enormous, isn't it? I mean, in a sense, you can't understand anything until you understand everything. And of course, to understand everything, you must, well, to understand anything, you must understand everything. I mean, you understand the one and the many. So we're stuck with that. I have to be selective at some point and do some of these things. Now, the third thing that I like to suggest is that this justice and righteousness by Joseph is proclaimed. And he proclaims it to a whole range of people. He proclaims it to Potiphar, to the prison warden, to the cupbearer, and to the Pharaoh. Let me just read you a couple of these because I think this might be new to you. Some of this is not, and I'm trying to make some guesses about what's new and not. Look at 39:2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord had given him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge, there's our word, of his household and entrusted to him the care of everything he owned. From the time on he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned. The Lord blessed him. Abraham, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you, right? If Potiphar is good to Joseph, things are going to go well for Potiphar, and that's happening. The Lord blessed the household of the Egyptians because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in his house and in the field. Now, how did Potiphar know that it was the Lord who was blessing Joseph? I assume that from the text. And I assume that Joseph told him. That Joseph opened his mouth and verbally said to Potiphar, you know, the reason why things are going well here is because the God Yahweh is blessing me and therefore blessing you. Now, it becomes a little sharper with the prison warden. Look at 39:21. He gets thrown into prison. The Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those who were in prison. And surely the warden understood there was some blessing on him. Now, very explicitly, in chapter 40, verse 8, we have the witness to the cupbearer and to the baker. Then Joseph said to them after he interpreted their dreams, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. So he's very upfront with these fellow prisoners. I can interpret dreams because God enables me to do this. The ability to interpret dreams, which would have been part of wisdom, very broadly conceived, comes from God. And then finally, chapter 41, verse 16, in front of Pharaoh, he says in 41:16, even clearer, seems like it gets bolder as you go up the ladder, huh? Most of us would tend to go the other way around, wouldn't we? So here he's standing before perhaps the most powerful man in the whole world, or at least one of the two or three most powerful men in the whole world, and he says to this exceedingly powerful man in 41:16, I cannot do it, that is, I cannot interpret the dream. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And then if you run your eye down to verse 39, you get the same sort of thing again. Verse 39 says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you. Now Pharaoh picks it up. So he's heard it, hasn't he? Joseph talks about his God. Joseph talks about his God. He talks about the ability, the wisdom to do justice that God gives him. Now, I won't do it now, but I just want to point it out, and we'll pick it up later. And that is, I suggest that conduct and feeding and proclaiming are three prongs of one witness. Can I say that again? That these three are three prongs of one witness. There's one witness. It has a unity, but it's made in three ways. And I won't argue it here, but later I will try to argue that in terms of witness, and I do mean the word witness, that it has three prongs that are interdependent, interconnected. You need all three of them to come together. Here you see in incipient form, and much of this is really quite incipient, isn't it? But it'll be clear as we go along. Here you see in beginning form that you have one witness with three prongs. Now I'm going to move a bit more quickly. The next section is about Joseph fulfilling the Genesis 12 promise, and I'm simply going to say it, not read it. Joseph is a blessing to Potiphar. I think we've already read that one. Joseph is a blessing to the prison warden. We've had something of that. Joseph was a blessing to Pharaoh in that he saved his country. Joseph was a blessing to Egypt in that he fed them. Now, I'm not going to do it here, but in the footnotes, I've given you a long footnote discussing that difficult passage where it says, and Joseph bought up all the land and so enslaved the Egyptians. We've done that early on, haven't we? And I've culled all the stuff I can find on that and buried it in a footnote. And when you get the note, you can go and read that and look at that. My own sense of that is, yes, that was the unintended consequence of Joseph doing this. He did enslave these people. I take that at face value. You say, dearie me, Joseph was a good guy. He was. But all the good guys in Genesis do bad things. They lie about their wife. They have favorites among their children. I mean, they're righteous, but they've got some bad spots, huh? Yeah. And Joseph's a good man. He's a righteous man. But he does some things that aren't so good. At least that's the way I would take it. You can read the footnote. And then finally, Joseph is a blessing to all the world. And I read that passage to you also. So the author of Genesis, the narrator, is saying to us very clearly through the actions that are happening here that Joseph is fulfilling the bringing of blessing to all the families of the world. Potiphar, the wardens, the prisoners, the Egyptians, the Israelites themselves, of course, the whole world, that they're all being blessed. And I suggest that that blessing comes through his right conduct, his feeding of them, which is a mighty act of justice, and through his proclamation, that at least in cryptic form, you have justice at work here. Now I want to back up, but I've not really gone backwards. I've actually taken the text as it comes. The Genesis 12 passage picks up, absorbs, and reworks the be fruitful and increase passage. And I want to look at those, and they are all connected. Each one is connected with the major actors. Look at Abraham 16, 1 through 6. And I'm going to try to do this at breakneck speed. So if you're not good at sword drills, that's all right. 16, 1 through 6. At least I think it. And I'm just going to read verse, oh dear, I got the wrong verse here. I'm going to read verse 9. Then the angel of the Lord, maybe I got the wrong verse. Let's see. I think I have the wrong one on this one. Let's go to 22:17. I've missed a reference somewhere. There is another one, but I can't find it. 22:17 says, this one had better be there. It's strange how references get away from you, isn't it? 22:17. I will surely bless you, he's talking to Abraham, and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky and as sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities and their enemies, and through your offspring all the nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Now, what I'm interested in here is the fact that we have the word numerous, which is the same word we have be fruitful and increase. The NIV obscures some of this, but it's the same underlying Hebrew terms. Now, let's go back to 16:9. Here we have one that's very odd. I'm not quite sure what to make of it. Sarah's handmaid, Hagar, has a baby named Ishmael. Ishmael is greatly distressed, but God comes and says to her, 16:9, after she's been thrown out by Sarah, the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress. She's run away, and submit yourself to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. It's the Genesis 1:28 language exactly. So the blessing of God upon creation, which is taken up and transferred to Abraham's line, is even transferred to Abraham's non-elect seed, Ishmael. It's going to be through Isaac, isn't it? Now, I'm sure there's a lot of theology to think about there, but I'm not going to try to think about that with you, all right? But go home and think about that over lunch. The promise is repeated to Isaac. Look at 26:4. And here you see the be fruitful and increase language again with Isaac. 26:4. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed. It's the word numerous again that's part of this language. You would see that more clearly in other translations. Run your eye down to verse 22. I think it's 22. No, it's not 22. Sorry about that. Well, I'll leave that. Jacob 28:3. 24. It's probably 24 now. Jacob 28:3. So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him and commanded him, do not marry this woman. And then in verse 3 it says, may God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase. Now there the words are actually used right together, and this allusion's absolutely spot on. Make you fruitful and increase your number until you become a community. So the fruitfulness and the increase is taken up into the promise to make a nation, and one of the components to have a nation is people. People, land, and rule, isn't it? So the be fruitful and increase flows into the people element. You have to have enough people to make the nation. And so you get a lot of talk in the Joseph story about the multiplication of these people. You have it again in 35:11 with Jacob, where again it's combined with the promise. And God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and increase in number. Why? A nation and a community of nations will come from you. So it has to do with that. And then Joseph, the promise is repeated to Joseph, 41:52. 41:52 says, the second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me, and here's the word, fruitful in the land of my suffering. So Joseph knows about this language. We get it again in 48:3. 48:3 says, Jacob said to Joseph, now this is not God talking this time, but Jacob repeating, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I'm going to make you fruitful and increase. It's exactly our terms. And I will make you a community. So you get be fruitful and increase. The result of that is a community, a society, a nation. So that language has been picked up, brought into the Abrahamic promise, woven into it, and it has to do with building the nation. 49:22, you get it one more time here. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring. The word fruitful is our term, fruitful. And then finally, sort of a capstone for it all. This is about the nation itself and not the people. 47:27 says, now the Israelites settled in Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased. Now, we're going to close the book of Genesis this week, and 400 years later, which is next Sunday, we will open Exodus 1, and the first thing Exodus 1 says to us, Exodus 1:7, is Israel was fruitful and increased and multiplied. So the author, the narrator, is wanting to drive home that point. Let me make a couple points from this. I've already made the one. Genesis 1:28 is picked up and taken into Genesis 12. That the creation perspective is incorporated into the covenant promise. Let me say that again. The creation perspective, be fruitful and increase and rule the earth, is taken up into the covenant promise. There are brands of theology that say, well, it was a jolly good idea for them to care for the earth, but you know, the real problem now is everybody's lost sinners and we need to get them saved, and that's the covenant, as if they were two different competing factors. That's a very widespread understanding of how the Bible works. It just isn't true. I mean, it's just not true. Read Genesis. That's why I've labored the be fruitful and increase passages there. That's why the narrator of Genesis labored them, right? I've simply read them. They're there. Did you see them? Well, I must say, you know, I've been teaching the Bible for 40 years. No, I went to some decent schools and I did pass. I saw it last week for the first time. Well, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? Yeah. Are you seeing it with me? Huh? Are you open to changing your mind? Are you open to learning on this? Thirdly, I would suggest, and here I'm making a broad statement, that there are not multiple distinct programs going on in the Bible. You have this age, and this age, and this age, and this age, and God keeps shifting programs on you. No. There's one program, and it has many different developments as it goes along, but it is one program. So there's one program with multiple stages, and that program is to build a just society. That one program is to build a just society, and it comes in multiple stages. Now, I have a note to myself at the top of the next page. Check the time and be quiet if you've gone long enough. I've gone long enough. I've checked the time. What I would do for you is rehearse the concept of justice one more time. I think we've done that. Broach for you the bringer of justice model. We'll get to that. And discuss with you things that I don't understand. And here are the 3 things I don't understand, all right? Joseph and favoritism. Yeah, that runs all the way through Genesis, doesn't it? And Joseph was favored and got him in trouble, and his dad should have known better because his dad was favored by his mom, but not by his dad. You know the Isaac and Rebekah story. And it looks like that Joseph, bless his heart, gave 5-fold to his brother Benjamin. Oh, when does it stop? How can you break the cycle of favoritism? And favoritism is right at the center of justice, isn't it? I have trouble with this, and I didn't work on it in detail with you. It looks to me like we have a story here about Joseph as a victim of injustice, coming to a point where he, after many years, age 17 to age 30, right? He finally gets to the point, and I read you one text here that says as much, he suffered. He finally gets to the point where after suffering all this time, he's in a position to forgive his brothers, right? And I would take forgiveness to be probably part of the justice vocabulary. But how does that work? How does that work? How do you get to the place of forgiving those people who've hurt you? And on what basis do you forgive them? Do they have to ask for forgiveness first? What was he doing with those brothers when he brought them in and sent them back and mixed up their bags and got them to come back in? And what game was he playing with them? Was he finding out whether or not they had really changed their minds? And then he would forgive them? But there's some things in the text that I don't know. And then finally, the story ends, and you know this, Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. I'll read it in the NIV. You intended me harm. The word really is evil. But God intended for good. It's the good and evil of Genesis 2. Now, Jack Mayle cornered me the other day, and he said, don't you think the good and evil has something to do with justice and righteousness? And I said, oh, Jack, I'm too busy to find that out. I don't know. I surfaced this week, and I looked on one of these esoteric websites that you can go and search everything that's ever been written on the Bible, and I found an article by a Harvard professor published in 1916, and his article was, Good and Evil, Genesis 2, a Matter of Justice. Wow, I said, whoa. So I read the article, of course. Bingo, got me. And he argues that good and evil in that text and in this text really mean it's the tree of knowing the difference between right and wrong. I think Jack's onto something. He's got his dissertation. He just needs to publish it. And we'll call him Dr. Jack Squared. All right? Yeah, I think, and so the bookends of Genesis are good and evil gone wrong. Good and evil, somehow or another, God's at work, and he brings good out of evil. He doesn't turn evil into good. That's magic. He brings good out of evil. That's sovereignty. And to shift the gears, he takes what has been done that's wrong, the injustice, the victim of injustice. And he takes the victim of injustice. What do you do with people who are the victims of genocide? And that's a real live question for lots of the world's people. You know that, don't you? And Christianity needs to have an answer. What do you do for the victims of injustice? There is a righting of that. And I think you have a little hint here about how that might work.